Every morning, Mina measured the coffee and Owen filled the kettle. They had never spoken about doing it that way. At some point, he had started waking first, or seemed to, and by the time she came into the kitchen, the kettle would already be under the tap, his thumb holding the lid back, water striking the steel with the same narrow sound it made every day. She kept the scale in the space between the fruit bowl and the wall. While he shook the last drops from the kettle into the sink, she slid the scale out with 2 fingers, set the jar of beans on it, and zeroed the display with her knuckle. The kitchen was small enough that if one of them left a cupboard door open, the other had to move around it. A crack ran through one white tile behind the sink and darkened when the room filled with steam. The kettle sat on a black base that kept a faint chalk ring around it, no matter how often either of them wiped it down. Its white numbers were usually the brightest thing in the room. That morning, Mina's phone lit once near the spoon rest and dimmed again before she looked at it. She saw only the little kettle icon and the word "updated" before Owen set the filled kettle on the base and the screen went black. He pressed the 205 preset with the side of his thumb. Mina tipped the beans into the grinder. The smell arrived dry and peppery at first, then darker when the burrs began. Owen reached up to the mug shelf without looking and took down the blue one with the hairline crack through the handle glaze and the heavier brown one that kept heat better. He set them side by side on the counter, blue nearest the sink, brown nearest the window, the way they always ended up anyway. The kettle clicked off before she had finished pouring the grounds into the dripper. She looked at it. Owen looked at it too, though only briefly, the way people glanced at an appliance when it made the wrong sound and then corrected for it in their own heads. "Maybe less water," he said. Mina checked the level through the open lid. There was enough for both cups and a little left over, as there always was. "Maybe," she said. She rinsed the filter, warmed the dripper, and began to pour. The first bloom lifted quickly, a little flatter than she liked. Owen waited for her to finish, then poured from the second kettleful of water she had not needed to heat. He always waited a little longer than she did before wetting the grounds. Once, months ago, he had said boiling water made weekday coffee taste of the pan it had been roasted in. She had laughed because that was not how coffee worked, and because she knew what he meant anyway. By the time they sat down, her cup was brighter and thinner than usual. His was all right. She did not say so. Neither did he. The next morning, the update notification was gone from her phone. The app had left a red dot in its place, small as a pinprick. Mina moved the phone aside to set down the grinder lid and forgot the dot immediately. Owen filled the kettle a little higher than the day before. She noticed because he usually stopped at the scratch in the metal near the inside seam, and this time, the water rode past it by half a finger. The lid did not catch on the first push. He pressed it again. Mina weighed out 30 grams and watched from the edge of her vision as he set the kettle down, waited a second longer than he needed to, and then hit the preset. It ran longer that time. Not much. Long enough that the white numbers held at 23 before climbing again, then stopped at 25 with 3 soft beeps. He poured first because she was still tapping the last grounds from the grinder cup into the paper filter. "Better?" she said, not meaning to. He looked up from the kettle. "For you, maybe." There was enough humor in it that she smiled. He smiled back, not broadly, just enough to let the line stay light. After he left for the shower, she drank the first half of her cup standing at the counter. It was better. The coffee had opened where yesterday's had stayed tight. The smell of it was sharper too, citrus underneath the ordinary bitter warmth of the kitchen. She rinsed her mug, set it upside down to dry, and on impulse, opened the kettle app. A banner at the top said firmware updated successfully. Below that, in smaller type, Improved heating efficiency based on household usage patterns. She read it twice. The sentence had the brisk, congratulatory tone smart home products used for things nobody had asked them to notice. The app offered a graph she did not open. There was also a new setting called Smart Heat, already toggled on. Owen came back into the kitchen with one sleeve still unbuttoned, reached past her for his mug and said, "What?" She locked the phone without showing him. "Nothing," she said. The kettle updated. He made a small sound that could have meant he heard her, or that he had found the second cuff button. On the third morning, the water suited him better. Mina knew it before he said anything because he did not wait as long after the kettle clicked off. He usually let it sit on the base for a count she had never bothered to name. That morning he lifted it at once. She saw the change, then saw him noticing that she had seen it, and both of them looked instead at the slow, dark rise of the bloom. Her own cup tasted rounder and duller. Not bad, just not quite awake. While she rinsed the dripper, Owen took his first sip and paused with the mug still near his mouth. "This is better," he said. Mina looked over. He glanced once at the kettle and added, "Maybe I closed the lid all the way today." The kettle sat on its base with a last thread of steam leaving the spout. Its screen had gone blank. The chalk ring around the plastic looked whiter where the morning light from the window struck it. "Maybe," Mina said. The morning after that, she added more water than she needed. Not enough to be obvious. Owen had filled the kettle, set it on the base, and turned to pull the dripper from the rack. Mina lifted the lid as if to check the level and let a little more water run in from the tap. 2 quick seconds, then pressed the lid back down with her palm. He saw her do it. If he hadn't, she would have had an easier time telling herself she had only corrected for yesterday. Nothing in the kitchen changed. The grinder ran. The cupboard over the mugs failed to shut on the first push and had to be nudged with a wrist. The kettle climbed through its white numbers and clicked off later than it had the day before. Her cup was better. His was not worse exactly, but she could see him waiting a little longer before his second sip, as if the coffee had asked to be considered before it was finished. He rinsed his mug and said, "It's doing something." Mina folded the damp filter around the grounds before dropping them in the bin. "Maybe the update," she said. He nodded once. That was all. After that, the mornings began to acquire edges. Some were small enough that she thought she might have imagined them, if they had happened only once. Owen filling to the scratch inside the kettle, and then, on another day, stopping below it. Owen pressing the lid twice. Owen hitting the preset as soon as the base lit, then later leaving the kettle standing there, for half a breath, one hand still on the handle, before he touched the button. Once he poured a little water back into the sink, before heating it, and did not look at her while he did it. Mina had her own versions. She began noticing how long the kettle sat empty on the base before he filled it, and whether the lid had settled flat or not. She opened the app only twice more, long enough to see a line chart moving up and down under Smart Heat, and the word learning in small gray type. After the second time, she stopped opening it. One Thursday, the water favored her 2 mornings in a row. The coffee came through clear and sharp, the way it did on weekends when she bought the smaller bag from the place on Lexington, and used more than either of them admitted was sensible for weekdays. Owen drank his without complaint, but when he set the mug down, she could smell the darker roast flattening in the cup between them. The morning after that, he let the kettle rest almost a minute before pouring. Mina watched the steam loosen from the spout and disappear. Owen stood with one hand on the handle and the other braced on the counter edge, looking not at the kettle but at the tile behind it. "That seems excessive," she said. "Yesterday was excessive." There was no weight in it beyond the sentence itself. She smiled despite herself. He did too, though he kept his eyes on the kettle until he started to pour. That cup suited him better. Hers tasted tired. The pattern should have settled then, or might have in a house with only one morning in it. Instead, it kept changing, because they did. The water would lean hot for 2 days, then cooler. It would click off early, then linger. Once it stopped at 203 and neither of them touched it, as if waiting to see which of them it had chosen. The coffee was good enough for both of them that day, which felt less like success than like the kind of compromise a machine arrived at by accident. For a few mornings after that, they both became careful. Not visibly careful. Nothing anyone else would have seen if there had been anyone else standing in the kitchen. But Mina stopped topping up the water. Owen stopped letting it sit so long. When she rinsed the filter, she used only what she needed. When he pressed the preset, he did it once, cleanly, and kept his thumb off the lid afterward. The kettle went on behaving almost, but not quite, like itself. She began to know what his cup would taste like from the way he set it down. On the mornings it ran hot, he left the mug near his right hand and forgot about it until it was almost too cool. On the mornings it ran cooler, he finished before she did, and stood to rinse it without taking the newspaper from the chair beside him. Mina's own coffee told on her more quickly. The cup she liked made her drink faster. The cup she didn't made her leave a thin dark crescent in the bottom, while she washed the dripper and wiped the counter around the kettle base, where water always found its way. Once, while she was doing that, Owen said, "You can turn that setting off, probably." She looked over her shoulder. "What setting?" "Whatever it thinks it's doing." He was looking at the kettle, not at her. The white numerals had already gone dark. The base kept its faint mineral ring. Mina wrung the cloth once over the sink. "I know," she said. She did not turn it off. It was not the app. It was not even the coffee. Not exactly. It was the way the two of them had begun to notice each other's smallest corrections, because the kettle had made them visible. She had not known, before the water started arriving wrong, how often Owen pressed the lid twice, or how long he usually waited before he poured, or that he always filled to the same scratch in the steel, unless he had slept badly. He, evidently, had known where she kept the scale, how many grams she used when the beans were lighter, and how much hotter she liked the first pour than he did. None of this felt like discovery. That was what made it hard to name. The knowledge was old. Only its outline had sharpened. One morning the kettle clicked off too soon again. Mina looked up from the dripper. Owen had already reached for the lid. His thumb pressed it down once, firmly, then stayed there a moment, as if the pressure itself might continue into the next day. She put her hand over his to move the kettle, and he stepped back for her at once, making room without surprise. Neither of them spoke. The dripper bloomed. Steam touched the window over the sink and drew the crack in the tile darker. The next day she woke later than she meant to. By the time she came into the kitchen, Owen was standing at the counter, with the jar of beans open, but the kettle still empty on its base. He looked as if he had been about to begin, and then, for some reason she could not have named if he had asked her to, had waited. Mina set her phone beside the spoon rest. The screen lit and went dark again under some notification she did not read. She crossed to the sink, took the kettle by the handle, and filled it to the scratch inside the steel. Owen moved aside before she asked. When she set the kettle down, he did not reach for the button. She pressed the lid once. It settled cleanly. Across from her, Owen slid the scale out from the space between the fruit bowl and the wall and zeroed the display with his knuckle.